bioethics, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our bi-weekly symposium, a special event today. And I should say thank you to the co-sponsors, and I'm going to look at my phone for this, who have kindly added their name to the sponsorship of today's event. And that includes the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, it's called ICTR, the School of Medicine Institutional Review Board, as well as the Bloomberg School of Public Health Institutional Review Board, and the Department of History of Medicine here at Hopkins, across the street in Welch. So we're really privileged to have a special speaker, and we're doing this a little bit differently than we have our typical symposia. So instead of a talk, we're going to actually have a panel, which will be first introduced and then moderated by my colleague, Professor Nancy Cass. She'll introduce the panel as well as herself. And then we will, after the panel discussion, open to the audience for your questions and comments. And so without further ado and taking any more time, let me turn it over to Nancy for the introductions and run of the show. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Jeff. So today we get to experience some amount of living history, which is, at least for me, so extraordinarily different from read history. Not only because we will undoubtedly learn more and or with greater accuracy, but I think in certain ways it reminds us that events like this syphilis study we're going to spend the next hour plus talking about were so very real, and we're not an academic thing in a book. So here's the way I would like to start and organize things for today, building on what Jeff said. I'm going to start by introducing our two panelists so that you know who is here before you. I'm then going to give just a little bit of background about this, what I will call Tuskegee syphilis study. And then we're going to show you a couple of short video clips from a documentary that was made a few decades ago about this study. And a documentary that I strongly urge everyone to see if you haven't already, and I'll introduce it with a little more detail in a minute. And then we'll sort of start in with the real Q&A with the panel. I will start that. There are some questions that I would like to be able to ask each of our panelists, and then, as Jeff said, we will open it up to each of you. So let me start by telling you who is here. So first, immediately to my right is a Johns Hopkins colleague, Professor Jonathan Zentelman. Dr. Zentelman is a professor at Johns Hopkins of Medicine, Dermatology, and Obstetrics and Gynecology in the School of Medicine, and he is also jointly appointed in the School of Public Health, which will not surprise you probably as you hear more about his background, because his work really bridges clinical care and population health. He has done a lot of things over his career, including in Baltimore, having directed the Baltimore City Health Department's Sexually Transmitted Infection Program, and developing the Johns Hopkins Center for STI Prevention and Training. He also has done syphilis mapping, which, I love these sort of fun facts in people's bios, led to his being highlighted in Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. He has worked throughout the decades as a clinician, but also has been active in health policy, having served as a senior medical advisor for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation in the 90s, and has testified both in the U.S. Congress and in the Maryland State Legislature on various issues related to infectious disease and public policy. He became the chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases at the Johns Hopkins Bayview campus in 2003. He has published more than 300 papers and has been part of discussions, and himself quite a scholar of the history, both about this Tuskegee syphilis study and other studies conducted by our government related to syphilis, including those that came out more recently related to, that occurred in Guatemala. And then to Dr. Zettelman's right is Mr. Peter Buxtun. Mr. Buxtun is sort of remarkable as part of this living history because he is known as the whistleblower for the Tuskegee study. When he was in his 20s and living in San Francisco and working for the San Francisco City Health Department, he was asked to also do some work for the Public Health Service, the National Public Health Service, which is, of course, what the CDC is the home institution for. He was a social worker and epidemiologist at the time, and he was asked by the Public Health Service to interview patients with sexually transmitted diseases. This led ultimately to his learning more about the Tuskegee experiment from coworkers and being sort of incredulous that this could be happening. This story ultimately was leaked by Mr. Buxtun to the New York Times, and as we say, the rest is history. So let me just tell you a little bit more. I'm going to do the bare bones of my understanding of the contours of this study with the invitation and expectation that my colleagues will correct and certainly add to this description. So this is a study that was started by our government on its own people in 1932. And 40 years later, when Mr. Buxtun was the whistleblower, it was stopped in 1972. So for 40 years, men, African-American, quite poor men from the Tuskegee, Macon County, Alabama region in the rural, poor south of the United States were recruited to be part of this government study. 399 men, 399 African-American men with syphilis were recruited to be part of the study, and 200 poor African-American men from the same community were recruited as controls. These were men who tended to have a small amount of formal education, very little access to the healthcare system, and they were told that this was an opportunity to get care and treatment from government doctors. And therefore, when the study, which went on for, again, 40 years, and followed them as a cohort regularly through asking questions, drawing blood, monitoring their clinical symptoms, which for some of the men, as happens with syphilis, went further and further and advanced, they were under the belief, because it was what they were told, that they were being treated by government doctors, and the blood draws and spinal taps were part of their care rather than research. The extent to which the Public Health Service went to make sure that these men stayed in the study and could continue to be followed was quite extensive, including that they were put on lists to not be drafted into World War II, that notices were sent to the surrounding clinics to not give these men antibiotics when penicillin came on the scene about 20 years halfway through into the study, so that they could be followed as a natural, part of a natural history study. So maybe with the help of my colleague Alan, we can transition to, again, just 2 video clips. This is a video, by the way, that is available in its entirety for free on YouTube called Deadly Deception. Remember, it was made a few decades ago as part of a Maryland Public Television Nova special, and therefore you'll see it's sort of an older technology, which doesn't in any way detract from the content. So we're going to show 2 quick clips from this. Okay, so I think we will transition to our panelists. I'm going to start with Dr. Zettelman, who I think is going to maybe add to some of what I said, and then we'll open up to Q&A.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Actually, I don't know which clips going to show, but it's very ironic for me as well, because the public health service physician who was criticizing Peter was John Cutler, who was the principal investigator in the Guatemala studies. So, and I think so I think it's reflective of a whole culture of, for lack of better words, flawed investigation, which was prevalent at the time. So, my background, I come to this outside of having been a reader of the New York Times when I was in middle school and high school. I really didn't know much about this until I went to the CDC in 1985. In 1985, I finished my internal medicine residency up in New York and went to the CDC and was assigned to the STD division. And actually, Bill Jenkins, who was, who's in the movie, was actually sitting and had an office right in the office suite right next door to me. And so I started hearing about the Tuskegee study firsthand. And I was actually asking Peter also, many of the old-time public health advisors who at that time were in supervisory roles at the CDC were probably people who were involved in the study. So I probably met a number of the principals. And the way I found out about Tuskegee was also through an interesting way. This was 1985, and at that time the compensation for the Tuskegee victims was actually a line item in the Division of STD budget. So we would hear about this, at administrative meetings. I think certainly, but there certainly was a culture in the past of, if you had syphilis, you really had to be very aggressive, and everybody needed to have bicillin injections whether they wanted it or not. In 1986, I was part of an STD program review in Alabama, where we went to Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham to actually review the STD program. And I drove there, I was close enough that we drove and didn't have to fly. So I stopped in Tuskegee. I was curious about this. And I was stopped in Tuskegee because I also learned about George Washington Carver as a kid. And stopped there. And the thing that struck me, I think it's probably still true today, was how impoverished the area is. It is really quite impressive. And therefore, and those things left a lasting impression on me. So I got back into this because, and Anna Powell, who's here, knows me very well. After doing STDs, I came here, had a very, and was struck by how the legacy of Tuskegee really impacts care that we provide as physicians to the community, especially to the African American community. I think we have other issues here as well. There's Henrietta Lacks and those in a long legacy, but I think it's something which really comes up and really inspired me to try to address this. And I think the way to address this is just by really being a humanist and really trying to be a good doctor, at least from my standpoint. It comes full circle to me because in 2010, I had actually told Anne that I had a very good career with STDs and wanted to do something else. And about a week later, I got a call from the CDC asking me if I'd be the technical advisor to the Guatemala study, which opened my eyes not only to the Guatemala stuff, but also to all of the Tuskegee materials that were there before. I'll end on one note. What's interesting is if you look at the way Cutler speaks about this, it's very kind of chilling. If you look, there's another investigator named Sidney Olansky who also has tapes, who was one of the other investigators, and he speaks about this in the same tones as well. There's a movie called Three Identical Strangers. Has anybody seen the movie? So if you look at the psychologist investigators in the movie, they have the same, Neubauer, they talk about it the same way. And this is recently, or, and I think, so I'm curious, what happens where the humanism of patients really gets lost, and how people just really can completely lose track, and which is why I think we have a lot of the need for the institutions that resulted from Peter's, and I think are a big part of Peter's legacy, which is basically the development of IRBs, which really were not there before. So I hope I haven't spoken too much.
That's right. So Peter, could you tell this story from your own memory? Walk us through what happened after you raised with your colleagues that you thought something was going wrong in this study.
I could talk for an hour.
Well, we'll stick to a few minutes because I have a long list of questions, but I appreciate that.
Do that too. I'm easily swayed by such offers. And let's just say something here first. That a whistleblower is not necessarily a fine person of high morality. I frankly don't know what the scope of whistleblowing entails. Is it a matter of finding criminal behavior and getting that punished? It could be. And many other things can be mentioned in this. You may have seen me do this, worse than Tuskegee. After we're done, please come up and take a look at this. I have other things. I couldn't find this earlier this morning, but I have a pretty much blank piece of paper, except it's got a circle at the top with the number 25 on it. What's that? At the bottom, it says the Surgeon General. Now, go ahead.
Professor Cass, I understand you have a very well-structured program, but I think a lot of us are here to hear what Mr. Buxtun has to say about his own experience. If he wants to spend the hour talking about that, can we let him do that?
Now, unfortunately, I'm 81 years old, and I couldn't make out a word that you said. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we'll make sure there's plenty of time, and I think there may be a lot of things people are hoping Mr. Buxtun will speak on. Go ahead, Peter, please.
Very quickly, let me just describe this document that's probably back in the hotel where I left it this morning. At the bottom, it says Surgeon General. At the top, it says 25. That's 25 years participation in the Tuskegee study without treatment for syphilis, known to be there. Each person was on a list. Lists. What do you do with lists? There were lists that the Germans used when they loaded people into trains and sent them east. I know about this sort of thing. I was born in Prague at a very young age, I'd like to say. But my family was half Catholic and half Jewish. And my father, who had been a young soldier in the Austro-Hungarian army in the First World War, knew about wars, had a lot of background in this sort of thing. I can literally talk for hours about the beginning of wars. Have I been in other wars? Yes, as a matter of fact, I have. What other wars? I happened to be in Beirut on the opening up of the Six-Day War. That was quite a story. There were other things that happened. I was air evac'd out of that one. And I also went into Saigon and other places during the Vietnam War. But I don't want to get off the subject here. African American people who had syphilis and people who had offices and white coats knew who they were. They had the lists of who they were. They had other lists of what the treatments had or had not been. And in fact, as you will find in my good friend Jim Jones' book, Bad Blood, you will find him mentioning that people were told that they had bad blood when all they needed was a shot of penicillin. How about that?
So I think just to reiterate, I think so the 25, was that a certificate that people got for participating?
They
That
got
was
$25
for participating.
For 25 years.
And now back to Nancy's question, how did you first find out about this and what did you actually do?
I took the job in San Francisco and I got paychecks, and my paycheck for my mileage came from the city of San Francisco, and my paycheck from the work that I was doing, which was trying to find people who had syphilis or gonorrhea. We treated both in our clinic, and there are many strange stories about that. I'll tell one or two for the people here about some of those things, but let me leave that out now. How did I hear about it? I had lunch. I had a favorite little delicatessen, a 5-minute walk away, and it was time for me to go for lunch, and I went, and I came back with a bag with 2 sandwiches in it. And there was a senior public health service officer. I knew him. He was dressed as nicely as my friend John right there. And he was talking to 2 of our nurses. These were nurses who had been in World War II, U.S. Army nurses. I knew them, I saw them every day. And he said, and the man was insane. And he must have had syphilis. His family took him to a doctor outside Tuskegee. And the doctor was an ordinary doctor, and he checked this man out quickly, and my God, the man had latent syphilis. The doctor immediately gave him a shot of penicillin, and the next thing anybody knew, the local medical society and the CDC jumped all over this doctor. Look what you've done. You've jogged our statistics. You have spoiled one of our subjects. Good God. Spoiled him with penicillin. Anyway, I'll go on if there's any other question.
So who is it that you then told? What did you do next when you were outraged?
I went to the library. We had plenty of information where I worked. One of my jobs was taking various different articles and books that were handed out free by CDC, some of them quite interesting. And I'd carry a bag of those, and I'd call up a doctor that typically a dermatologist. Dermatologists found a lot of syphilis in those days. I see somebody nodding and said, "Are you a dermatologist?" No, okay. But still, dermatology led to a lot of things. Okay, one other quick side story. One of the things I had to do was sudden interviews. Peter, go out to the Army base in San Francisco at the time. There's a fresh case of syphilis there. So I went out, big deal. So it's a fresh case of syphilis. Everyday business as usual. And it was a young black guy, a GI, private or whatever he was. He had just come back from overseas in Vietnam. And I won't exactly quote him because his language was a bit rough. And he said, a man goes to go and have a good time, and he penicillin, and the doctor that treated him knew and told him, you're going to be okay. Your hair is going to grow back, your hands will come back, the cracks in your palms and all of that are going to be healed by nature. And he was a typical person of that sort. There was a similar one, a sailor off of some merchant ship came into our clinic, and I was told to interview him. I'm trying to remember, did he speak Spanish? Do I speak Spanish? A little bit, not much. And I had to interview whoever came in the door. And was there a Spanish speaker in the clinic? No. Could we get a Spanish speaker on the phone or get somebody brought in? No. We were dealing with whatever came in the door, and there were a lot of strange people.
So it sounds like, so you're describing, and also for some of the clinicians in the room, the person you described sounds like a very classic case of secondary syphilis. And it sounds like you're describing the work that you did as, and I think you described it when you first started speaking about what you were doing as a venereal disease. I think they were called venereal disease investigators at the time, or disease intervention specialists. And you said that you went to the library. But I think it sounds like you were struck. Had you found anything, any situation where people, it was recommended not to treat patients with syphilis, because the other situation, what you're describing is, treatment situations. Was it, when you went to the library, did you find anything, any recommendations not to treat syphilis? And, this clearly started to boil up within you, and what happened after that?
Well, we spoke earlier about something. One of the keys to what went on in the Tuskegee study was covered like 2 words: autopsy-oriented. These people were being used for an autopsy-oriented study. Where else could you find such things? Well, the Japanese did such things in World War II, particularly in China and Manchuria. And
So actually, what I think what Peter's referring to is that as part of the consent process for the study, well, there wasn't consent, but actually, as part of the process, they were offered, when people died, they were offered funeral assistance, which was a big deal, and that included autopsies. And so there was, within the clinicians, there was a lot of emphasis on getting autopsies to map out the various manifestations of syphilis in these untreated people.
let me disentangle something here. There was a young black nurse who lived in the area. I don't know her full story anymore. I remember parts of it. But she lost her regular job as a nurse during the prohibition period, during the time when the economy collapsed. Right, thank you. The Depression. Yeah, I need a little help here. And she had to take a job washing dishes in somebody's home. And then she was hired by the CDC. For what? They wanted her for the roundups. What was a roundup? They would gather the men on the list. They wanted to get them to come into either a church or a school or whatever public building might be available, where the men from those fields around Tuskegee would be working. They could be brought in, and they'd have to roll up their sleeves, or they'd be asked to roll up their sleeves, and then they'd be told, well, are you having any pains or heart problems? They were looking for cardiac problems from syphilis. scene. And then the play came up called Miss Evers' Boys. Boys? These were men. At the time that President Clinton apologized for the Tuskegee study, there was an Herman Shaw there, a brilliant man. And he gave the acceptance speech for the Tuskegee study. And his words when he was given the podium, and I don't think it's recorded anywhere publicly. If somebody dug in Washington at the White House, there probably is a public affairs link there that would have the film and the recording of everything that was said in the apology. I was there. I got sort of an invitation because a few people knew me. Oh, okay. And the person in front of me was breaking down in tears. And he and other people had different opinions about what was going on. And one of the other people had been on the list to be the next I want to say Governor General, that's the wrong term. It's the
Secretary of Health or
Surgeon
General.
Surgeon General. But he didn't get the actual job of Surgeon General because of two things. He had practiced medicine in Tuskegee as a regular physician, and there was an issue that he had been giving abortions in the capital city of Alabama, and he had also given abortions in Tuskegee, and that didn't work well with the politicians in Washington, so he didn't become Surgeon General either. But any other questions along that line that you'd like to ask?
I'd like to ask you one more question, then I will ask one of Jonathan, and then we'll open it up. Why did you decide to send information about the study to the New York Times?
I wasn't the person who did that. That was my friend Edith Lederer. Be careful, there are two Lederers in this history here. And she's somebody I knew. And there was a group of us that sort of hung around together in San Francisco, but she was one of them.
Was she also a disease investigator?
No, not at all. She wouldn't know a case of syphilis from hay fever. Anyway, but she is today, I think, I haven't talked to her most of a year, but she is probably still the Associated Press main person for the Associated Press at the UN. She's there daily, working long hours, and she knew what was going on, and I told her. In fact, I showed her my files that I had that came from CDC, the Roundup files. Well, this wasn't like cowboys rounding up cattle. These were CDC people bringing in people for treatment, and sometimes the treatment would be a bogus treatment, a form of liquid aspirin. Oh, you're not feeling well. Oh, your heart, you got pains in your chest. Here, have a glass of this. Have a bottle of this. Take the bottle cap off when you get home. Take a swig of it. It was essentially just an ordinary painkiller, like aspirin, liquid aspirin that they were using. And you find that mentioned in Joe Jones' book, Bad Blood. But I don't know, are there any more questions along that line?
Well, let me do one for Jonathan, and then we'll open it up. So Jonathan, In your introduction, spoke, if I understood you correctly, about, in certain ways, your response as a doctor to living through and witnessing so much of this as being one to maintain your humanism. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts or advice for researchers.
Yes. So I'll be very short because I think I want this mostly to be about Peter. But I think as a clinical researcher and having done clinical trials, participated in clinical trials, both mostly as an investigator, occasionally as a subject, I think it speaks to, and we heard it in Cutler, sort of like as almost as an extreme version. We have to manage an inherent conflict of interest. And the conflict of interest is that if we get the project finished, if we enroll subjects, we're going to report on the data, and we're going to get attribution, recognition, prestige, potentially money, not within this setting, but in other settings, especially if we're doing commercial work. And I think no matter how good you think you are, we're human, and I think we have an innate conflict of interest, and I think this is why it speaks to the need for outside review. And I think,
well, let's talk about conflict of interest. There is, let's say, another book, very easy to find. If you don't have 10 copies here in your library, I'll be amazed. Acres of Skin. This has to do with prisoners of various different federal and other prisons in different areas. The person that I have run across recently is the man who wrote the book called Acres of Skin. And I see heads nodding there, I'm sure, of dermatologists. And that's something you will find of great parallel interest to what happened in Macon County, Alabama.
Thank you. All right, let's open it up. I saw a few hands before, I thought. Yeah, Ruth.
Let's use a microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Here comes, Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne. So, something short of 1,000 questions, Peter, but let me start with one. When you first learned of, or began to suspect of what was going on in Tuskegee, did you find, clearly you found one person at least, your friend who eventually sent the file to the press. She was herself, it sounds like, a journalist. But did you find other people responding as you did, or most people responding the way that Dr. Cutler responded? What did you experience humanly?
Well, I can extend your question a little bit if I am understanding it correctly. Remember, I'm hard of hearing. So, what I was going to tell you about, I have here the envelope of a little bit of material sent to me by Dr. Olansky. Okay, Dr. Olansky was born in somewhere in the Ukraine, I think, and his family moved to this country, and he eventually became a very well-known dermatologist. His two sons worked with him in dermatology, and he put his foot in his mouth terribly in Atlanta, Georgia. When various people in the news media knew that the publication of the history of the Tuskegee study had gone through a period of something like 10 years, and they wanted to publish things about that in the local newspapers, and somebody walked into Dr. Olansky's office and said, Dr. Olansky, did you work on that study? Oh, yes, I'm very pleased with it. And then his words at one point, this is where he really tripped and fell. a form of the private humor of doctors at that time. All of them? No. Some of them? Yes. I remember this. I had a friend, a family friend in London. She had been a doctor for most of her life. She did it also. That was the private way that people cracked jokes. I didn't think it was that funny.
So I think just to take on this point, I think what you're doing is you're speaking to some of the innate racism that was present within a good part of the medical community at that time. I mentioned also that Olansky was one of the syphilis researchers, and Olansky and Cutler published. If you PubMed this, you'll find their citations. There's a very similar interview with Olansky, and in fact, the dermatology library at Emory was named Olansky because they had donated the money, but then the name was stripped about 20 years ago because of this legacy. I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you a question which actually Reverend Keene, who's my friend, asked you. Maybe you can. When this all happened, you were 27 or something. You were a young man. And Reverend Keene's question was, most people in their late 20s don't have the moral conviction to go up against an enormous bureaucracy. You know, what inspired you? What gave you the strength to do that?
It was a strength, it was stupidity. Perhaps there was more than just stupidity, but I have a European background. I speak fairly decent German. I speak a little bit of other things. And I don't want to cover myself with glory. There's a couple of lines in Jim Jones' book copying something that somebody said. When they went into Macon County, Alabama, somebody said, and it's quoted in that book, we're either going to cover ourselves with mud or with glory. And that was true, they covered themselves with mud.
I just want to mention,
Yeah, okay.
I just want to mention, I've been friends with Peter for over 20 years, and I think an important component of this story is that Peter's family suffered from the Holocaust. His father evacuated the family, was wise to do so, but his family suffered greatly in Europe because of what went on. And I think that this impacted his participation in trying to make this stop.
Again, I don't want to put myself in certain places, the Holocaust did not affect my family directly. My father was smart enough to get us out of Europe and into Larchmont in the suburbs of New York before the war broke out, when Hitler invaded Poland and all that horror came about. That was more of what was the Holocaust, the 6 million dead Jews, and there were plenty of other people who were killed. Anybody with a Polish background here, you know about Katyn?
Yeah.
Hi, I am curious. So you said the woman who actually submitted the documents to the paper was a journalist. So for her, that was probably helpful in her career. How did it impact you in your career inside of the medical community?
How did not have I? I'm sorry.
How did all the disclosures on the Tuskegee impact your career at the CDC and afterwards?
After I quit my job, the bullets were going over my head.
And did that come, did the bullets come both from the CDC in Atlanta and from the San Francisco Health Department?
There was some of that when I was brought there at one point to I thought I was being brought there to to be participating in a meeting of people who were dealing with the problems of syphilis, the treating of how it.
And this was being brought to Atlanta, right?
To Atlanta. And I was brought into a large professional meeting, somewhat like this. But I was told, wait outside, there's a chair over there, wait there, we'll give you a magazine, you can read it, whatever you want to do. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm being shortchanged all this. And so, without anybody paying any attention, I walked right by the people at the front door. They were handing out things like this. I didn't have one. I just walked in and sat at the back of the room, took my own notes, and when it was done, I was brought along with probably Dr. Cutler and other people into a conference room in the basement of CDC where the confrontation occurred. And basically, I was told that I could keep my job and go back to San Francisco, which I did, until I got bored with it and went to law school, which that got boring also.
So the documentary had an epidemiologist who said he put it in the papers to start with, but it didn't go anywhere. What was different, or what did you have to do to make the greater community actually address it? What was the difference in approach? So that say you want to blow the whistle, what made it actually get the wheels moving?
Can you repeat what you said, please?
Yeah. What, within what actually was the tipping point that actually got things moving, I would say from two standpoints. One is actually getting the materials to your friend letter to give to the journalist, but also tell us about what your experience after everything came out.
Well, that was a blunder, not mine, someone else's. I had my files, and I had my friend, and I said, hey, come over, I'm going to show you what I've got. You ought to take a look at this. You're a professional with the Associated Press. Oh, okay. So she sat down and started going through this stuff, and she said, and I'll not forget, she said, can I take this home and show it to my boss at work tomorrow? Yeah, I wish you would. And she did. But what did he do? He was an AP boss. Now, you have a question?
Oh, I was just wondering, it seems like you've brought a lot of those materials here today. Would it be possible for us to have a copy of those so we could take them back into our communities as well?
We'll certainly ask.
I've got to make this point because this is important. What happened was she showed the material to her boss, and he looked at it and said, this is a story, but you can't write it. You're a cub reporter. You've just been working for a few months. And she was working in San Francisco in the AP office, and he told her, you'll have to send this to one of the senior people either in Washington, D.C. or in New York. And she did, and she sent it to an AP reporter who has been getting credit over and over and over again for ending the Tuskegee story. So take that one and try to put it in the right place.
Yeah, fairness goes in many flavors. We could do one last quick question if there is one.
I'll have one. If no one else does. So, and this is addressed to both of you.
Can you speak a little more?
This is addressed to you both. I am a non-affiliated member on an IRD currently. What do you suggest if you're looking at if you're looking at things today and there are things in it that make you feel ethically uncomfortable?
Yeah. So I think basically, I'll ask you to respond first, and then I'll respond also. As a result of the Tuskegee study revelations, there's institutional review boards which became for regulating research. What's your advice if something that is presented, there's a research protocol that is on the plate of an IRB, which, how do you, if you were sitting on an IRB, how would you look at the issues to assure that human rights protections?
Here's another surprise. I wound up sometime after the publication in the New York Times, and that was a bombshell. But the IRBs, they immediately showed up in our large medical community in San Francisco. And for some reason, I got invited to an IRB meeting. What am I doing here? So, I had my opinions, and they came up, and things went on, and one of the first things I saw was angry doctors. You're messing up our activities here. What's all this IRB stuff? And then it went on, and things developed, and IRBs are now, I think, a fairly, well, you're a better commenter on that.
I wanted your input, so I think I'll respond very quickly, and also, and careful, because my IRB chair is here, and Reverend Keene is my community member, so come seriously. I think we take, and I think there's variation. I think we are, at least here, we are serious about the IRB work. And we have told, that if we do not believe that in research there's risk, and if the potential benefit does not outweigh the risk, or if there's issues that we think are problematic, those protocols do not, will either get sent back to revise them, or they don't, or sometimes we occasionally have actually rejected them. So I think, now, are we perfect? No, and I think this is a judgment issue, but I think there's a serious attempt made to actually try to advance science, but also protecting human subjects from as a core value. I think the reflections that you saw up by Cutler are chilling reminders of where we can be if we don't really manage this.
Which I think is a great way to answer the role each individual can play in setting the moral compass straight. Peter, please, last comment.
There is a little thing to mention too, but it means a lot. I happened to be in Tuskegee about a year ago, and I was invited to come by a lady there who has a number of connections because she was born there, and the rest of her family is all around her. And at one point, we were between two buildings, and I was talking to her, and she was bringing people over to talk with me. And there were two young black guys from some local television station. They had, one guy had a microphone, the other guy had a camera. And they were filming me talking to local people about two things, Tuskegee and, well, three. The school that had been built as a result of some of the funds, and you'll find this in Jim Jones' book, and also some of the things that happened. And a lady who was brought over, a very thin lady in her 90s, and she told me in front of the cameraman, who was in tears, this cameraman filmed me asking her, "Did your father have cardiac problems?" He did. And I asked her, how bad were they? Terrible. He couldn't sleep in his own bed. He had to sleep at the dinner table in a chair, and he died in that chair. And you should have seen those two guys with the camera and all of that, they were in tears. So was I.